She paid for his meal, with the last $18 to her name, never expecting to see him again. But the next morning, her quiet street was lined with black cars and silent men, and she learned that some debts are repaid not with cash, but with loyalty as deep as the grave. The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets, drumming against the windows of the 24-hour diner. It was the kind of night in Chicago where the city felt both immense and claustrophobic, the gray sky pressing down on the wet asphalt. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old coffee and fried onions. I sat in a booth, nursing a cup of lukewarm water, watching my son, Marco, meticulously color a placemat menu with a broken crayon. He was 7, and to him, this was a grand adventure. To me, it was a desperate stall. Our apartment was cold, the final eviction notice was taped to the inside of the door, and my purse held exactly $18.43. That money was supposed to be for a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread to last us until my next paycheck, which felt a lifetime away. Across the diner, an old man sat alone. He was frail, with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 100 winters. He wore a simple, worn coat, clean, but frayed at the cuffs. He ate slowly, a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, with a quiet dignity that felt out of place in the fluorescent glare. I found myself watching him, a strange kinship forming in the shared silence. We were two islands in a sea of late-night chatter. When he finished, he motioned for the waitress. I saw him pull out an old leather wallet, and then I saw the slight shake of his head. I watched the waitress's expression shift from patience to pity, then to quiet frustration. His card was declined. He fumbled again, his hands trembling slightly, but came up empty. My heart seized. I knew that feeling, the hot flush of shame, the desperate calculation, the world shrinking to a single, impossible transaction. Before I could think, I was on my feet. I walked to the counter, my own hands shaking as I pulled out my last $18. "I'll get his," I whispered to the waitress, trying not to draw attention. She gave me a surprised, compassionate look and nodded. I paid for his $7 meal and mine, a single order of toast for Marco. The change felt impossibly light in my hand. The old man watched me, his dark eyes unreadable. As I walked back to my booth, he stood up and approached, his steps slow but steady. He didn't offer thanks in the way I expected. He simply looked at me, a deep, penetrating gaze, and said in a voice raspy with age, "A kind heart in a cruel world is a light. Never let them put it out." He then turned and walked out into the rain, disappearing into the night. I sat back down, the weight of what I'd just done crashing over me. I had just given away our food money for a stranger. Was I a fool? Or had I done the only human thing I could? Comment below. Would you have paid for his meal? The walk home was a blur of glistening streets and the rhythmic swish of passing cars. Each splash of water from a tire felt like a mockery, a reminder of the storm both outside and within me. Marco held my hand, his small fingers squeezed tight, chattering about the funny drawings on the placemat. He was oblivious, wrapped in the innocent certainty that Mom would always provide. That certainty was a weight I carried every single day, and tonight it felt heavier than ever. My act of charity in the diner now seemed reckless, a foolish indulgence I couldn't afford. The old man's words echoed in my head, a kind heart in a cruel world. But kindness didn't pay the rent. It didn't fill an empty refrigerator. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, wasn't a man who dealt in kindness. He dealt in certified checks and eviction notices. When we got back to our third-floor walk-up, the cold inside the apartment was even more biting than the night air. The eviction notice on the door seemed to glow in the dim hallway light, a stark white rectangle screaming failure. I peeled it off, crumpling it into a tight ball, as if crushing the paper could somehow crush the reality it represented. Inside, I went through the motions of our nightly routine. I helped Marco change into his pajamas, listened to him brush his teeth, and tucked him into his bed, a mattress on the floor in the corner of our one-room apartment. He fell asleep almost instantly, a small smile on his face, dreaming of things I could no longer afford to give him. I stood over him for a long time, the silence of the room broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. A hum that was more of a death rattle. I opened its door, more out of habit than hope. A half-empty carton of juice, a single egg, and a jar of mustard stared back at me. My stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from a deep, primal fear. What had I done? That $18 could have been a box of pasta, a can of sauce, a few days of reprieve. Instead, I'd spent it on a moment of connection with a stranger, a fleeting feeling of doing something good. It was a luxury for people whose children weren't on the verge of homelessness. I lay down on the couch, pulling a thin blanket over myself, and stared at the ceiling. The rain continued its relentless assault on the window pane, each drop a tiny hammer chipping away at my resolve. Sleep wouldn't come. There was only the gnawing question repeating itself over and over in the darkness. What am I going to do tomorrow? I must have drifted off eventually because the sound that woke me wasn't the rain. The storm had passed. This was something else. A low, continuous hum, a vibration that seemed to seep through the floorboards. It was the kind of sound you feel in your bones before you can place it. My first thought, hazy with sleep, was that it was a garbage truck. But it was too early, barely dawn, the sky a bruised purple through the window. The sound didn't move on. It stayed, a steady, powerful purr of multiple engines idling in unison. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Landlords don't send garbage trucks, they send sheriffs, they send movers. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the deep, resonant hum from outside. I crept to the window, my bare feet cold on the worn linoleum. Peeking through a crack in the blinds, my breath caught in my throat. My street, usually empty at this hour, save for a few parked, rusted cars, was transformed. Lined up along the curb, perfectly spaced, were at least 5 sleek, black sedans. They were immaculate, their polished surfaces reflecting the first weak light of morning like pools of dark water. They weren't police cars. They weren't government vehicles. They were luxury cars, the kind you see in movies, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. They screamed money and power, 2 things that had no business being on my dilapidated block. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible scene. Was this a mistake? Did they have the wrong address? Then, in a synchronized, silent movement, the car doors opened. Men began to step out. They were all dressed in dark, well-tailored suits, their faces grim and unreadable. They moved with a quiet, disciplined efficiency that was more unnerving than any loud threat. They weren't looking around. They were all looking in one direction, at my building, at my window. A cold wave of pure terror washed over me. I stumbled back from the window, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. This wasn't about rent. This was something else entirely, something dangerous. Who were these people? What could they possibly want with me? I was nobody, just a single mother trying to keep her sons safe. My gaze fell on Marco, still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the silent army assembling outside our door. And in that moment, I realized my fear wasn't just for myself. It was for him. What trouble had I brought to our doorstep? The men on the street didn't approach the building, not at first. They opened the trunks of their cars and my confusion deepened, overriding even my fear for a moment. They weren't pulling out weapons or eviction equipment, they were pulling out boxes. Dozens of them, brown cardboard boxes, white grocery bags and large, brightly wrapped packages that looked like gifts. They formed a silent, efficient line, passing the items from the cars to the sidewalk in a steady stream. There was no shouting, no idle chatter, just the soft thud of boxes being set down and the whisper of expensive leather shoes on wet pavement. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their purpose clear yet utterly incomprehensible to me. I watched, mesmerized and terrified, from my window. It was a surreal spectacle. One man carried a massive teddy bear, its button eyes seeming to stare right up at me. Another hoisted a crate of what looked like fresh oranges, their bright color a shocking contrast to the sea of black suits and dark cars. There were bags overflowing with vegetables, sacks of flour and rice, and sleek boxes bearing the logos of high-end electronics stores. It looked like they were stocking a supermarket, not visiting a rundown apartment. My mind couldn't process it. Was this a bizarre charity stunt? A television show? But there were no cameras, no crew, just these silent, imposing men and a mountain of goods growing on the sidewalk below. The sheer volume of it was staggering. It wasn't just food, it was everything. Toys, clothes, a brand new microwave still in its packaging. It was a lifetime of want being delivered to my doorstep in the span of 10 minutes. But the delivery felt less like a gift and more like a statement, a display of overwhelming force. The men never once looked up, never acknowledged the few curious neighbors who were beginning to peek out from their own windows. They were focused, their mission singular. When the last box was unloaded, they closed the trunks with a soft, unified click. The mountain of goods now covered the entire patch of cracked sidewalk in front of my building's entrance. My fear was now a tangled knot of bewilderment. This couldn't be for me. It had to be a mistake. But then one of the men detached from the group. He was younger than the others, his face clean-shaven and serious. He walked directly to the front door of my building, his footsteps echoing in the quiet morning air. He didn't try the handle. He just stood there for a moment, and then I heard it. A soft, polite, but firm knock on my apartment door. The knock echoed in the small apartment, a sound both gentle and demanding. My heart leapt into my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to pretend I wasn't home. Marco stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about superheroes, and the sound of his voice solidified my fear into a protective shell. I couldn't let anyone in. I couldn't expose him to whatever this was. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall as if I could melt into it. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I held my breath, listening. Then the knock came again, just as polite, just as firm. It wasn't the impatient banging of a landlord or the heavy fist of law enforcement. It was controlled, patient. They knew I was in here. A voice came through the door, low and calm. "Ma'am, we're not here to cause any trouble. We just have a delivery for you." The voice was smooth, educated, not at all what I expected. But it did little to calm my racing pulse. A delivery? This wasn't a delivery. It was an invasion. I thought about the phone on the counter, about dialing 911. But what would I say? That men in nice suits were trying to give me groceries? It sounded insane. I was trapped between an inexplicable act of, what? Generosity and a deep, gut-wrenching feeling that I was in over my head. I had to know. I had to see a face. Taking a shuddering breath, I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed the young man I'd seen from the window. He was standing respectfully, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't looking at the door, but down at the floor, as if to seem less intimidating. His posture was deferential. It was so at odds with the scene on the street that my fear faltered, replaced by a wave of dizzying confusion. Finally, I unlatched the chain, the metallic rattle deafeningly loud in the silence. I opened the door just a crack, my body braced to slam it shut. The man didn't try to push his way in. He simply met my gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "For you," he said, his voice even softer in person. He gestured toward the floor. On my grimy welcome mat sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. He placed it there, slid it a few inches toward my door, and then took a step back. "This is a gesture of gratitude from a friend." He turned without another word, his footsteps receding down the stairs. I stood there, frozen, the door still ajar, staring at the envelope. It had no name, no address, just a heavy wax seal on the back. A seal I didn't recognize. Who was this friend? And what kind of gratitude came delivered by an army of silent men at dawn? My hand trembled as I reached down and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, made of thick, expensive cardstock that felt alien in my world of flimsy bills and second-hand paperbacks. The wax seal on the back was intricate, a crest of some kind, a lion holding a key. It felt ancient, formal, and deeply intimidating. For a moment, I just held it, the weight of it a tangible representation of the mystery that had descended on my life. I finally managed to close and lock the door, the deadbolt sounding like a cannon shot in the quiet apartment. I leaned against the door, my legs weak, and slid the rest of the way to the floor. Marco was awake now, sitting up on his mattress and rubbing his eyes. "Mommy, who was that?" he asked, his voice small and sleepy. I forced a smile. "Just a delivery, sweetie. Go back to sleep for a little while." He burrowed back under his blanket, and I turned my attention back to the envelope. My fingers fumbled with the seal, breaking it with a soft crack. Inside, there was no letter, no lengthy explanation, just two things. The first was a small, crisp note, written in elegant, cursive handwriting. The ink was black and bold against the cream paper. It contained only 8 words. "A debt of honor is always repaid in full." There was no signature, no name, just that simple, chilling declaration. A debt of honor. What debt? The $7 for a bowl of soup? This was no repayment, this was something else, a message. The second item in the envelope was the source of its weight. It was a thick stack of $100 bills held together by a simple paper band. I pulled the money out, my breath catching in my chest. I started counting, my fingers clumsy and numb. 1,000, 2,000. I counted it twice, then a third time, convinced I was making a mistake. It was $10,000, more money than I had seen in one place in my entire life. It was enough to pay the back rent, to pay next month's rent, to pay the month after that. It was enough to fix the rattling engine in my car, to buy Marco new shoes, to fill the refrigerator 100 times over. It was a lifeline, but it felt like an anchor. This wasn't charity. Charity came with tax receipts and pamphlets. This came with unspoken rules and a lion holding a key. Where did this money come from? The men in suits, the black cars, the phrase debt of honor. A cold, terrifying realization began to dawn on me. I hadn't just paid for a poor old man's meal. I had unknowingly stumbled into a world I knew nothing about, a world that operated on a completely different set of codes. And this money, this solution to all my problems, felt less like a gift and more like the first link in a chain. The men outside were gone. As silently as they had arrived, the black cars had vanished, leaving behind only the staggering pile of goods on the sidewalk and the faint smell of expensive exhaust. But their presence lingered. My neighbors, usually a mix of hurried commuters and solitary shut-ins, were all at their windows. I saw Mrs. Rosie across the street, her small, bird-like frame silhouetted behind her lace curtains. Mr. Chen from downstairs was standing on his stoop, pretending to sweep, but not moving the broom. The entire block was watching. The silent, efficient operation had turned my anonymous struggle into a public spectacle. My poverty had been a private shame, but this sudden, inexplicable wealth was a public mystery, and it made me feel more exposed than ever. I knew I had to bring the things inside. Leaving them there would invite questions or worse, theft. With my heart still pounding a nervous rhythm, I opened the door and began the slow, arduous process. Box by box, bag by bag, I carried the impossible bounty up the 3 flights of stairs. My arms ached and sweat beaded on my forehead, but I moved with a frantic energy fueled by adrenaline and fear. The sheer quantity was absurd. There were gourmet pastas, imported olive oils, wheels of cheese, and cuts of meat I didn't even recognize. For Marco, there were building blocks, art supplies, a new bicycle still in its box, and clothes for the next 3 years. It was a catalogue of everything we had ever needed or wanted. As I was struggling with the last, heaviest box, the one containing the microwave, Mrs. Rossi shuffled across the street. She was a neighborhood institution, a widow in her 80s who had lived in the same small house since she was a bride. Her family had come from Sicily generations ago, and she was the keeper of the neighborhood's history and its secrets. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane, her dark eyes missing nothing. She didn't offer to help. She just stood at the bottom of my stairs and watched me, her expression a mixture of pity and something else. Recognition. "You are a foolish girl," she said, her voice a papery whisper. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact. "But you have a good heart. That can be a dangerous thing around here." I paused, panting, and looked down at her. I don't understand what's happening." She looked up at the sky, as if consulting with ghosts only she could see. "Some men they do not forget," she said, cryptically. "A kindness to one of their own. It is a kindness to the whole family. Be careful, Eleanor. Accept the gifts, be quiet, and do not ask questions. You have paid a small price for a very powerful friend." And with that, she turned and shuffled back to her house, leaving me with a chilling new piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a friend, it was a family. Mrs. Rossi's words echoed in my ears long after she had disappeared back into her house. A very powerful friend, a kindness to the whole family. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. The old man in the diner, his quiet dignity, the way he carried himself despite his worn clothes. He wasn't just some forgotten soul, he was one of them. The men in black suits, the silent efficiency, the talk of honor and debts. It was all straight out of a movie, but this was my life. This was my doorstep. The $10,000 on my kitchen table suddenly felt radioactive, glowing with an unseen history. I imagined the hands it must have passed through, the businesses it came from. Was this profit from some illegal enterprise? Was it blood money? A war raged inside me. One part of me, the desperate, pragmatic mother, screamed to take it, pay the rent, buy the medicine Marco needed for his asthma, fix the car, escape the crushing weight of poverty that had been my constant companion for years. This money was a key, a way out of the prison of my circumstances. It was an answer to a prayer I had been too weary to even whisper lately. It was survival. But another part of me, the part that taught my son to be honest, to do the right thing even when it was hard, recoiled. Accepting this felt like making a deal. It felt like stepping over a line into a world of shadows and violence, a world governed by codes I didn't understand. What would be expected of me in return? Debts of honor, I was learning, were not one-time transactions. I spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated paralysis. I put away the groceries, the sheer abundance of food, feeling obscene in my tiny kitchen. I hid the new toys, not wanting to explain their origin to Marco. Every time a car backfired on the street, I jumped. Every footstep in the hallway made my blood run cold. I was a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by gifts that felt more like a cage. The eviction notice I had crumpled up lay in the trash, a symbol of the life I could leave behind. The stack of cash on the table was the gateway to a new one. But what kind of life would it be? Would I always be looking over my shoulder? Would these silent, powerful men always be a part of my world now, a shadow lurking just out of sight? That night, I watched Marco sleep, his face a perfect picture of innocence. He deserved a better life than the one I could provide. He deserved warmth and food and security. Could I give him that if it meant using money that was tainted? The question had no easy answer. It was a choice between my principles and my son's future, and I didn't know which one I could bear to sacrifice. 3 days passed, 3 days of living in a state of suspended animation. I used a small portion of the cash, $200, to buy Marco's asthma medication and some basic necessities we were completely out of. Each bill I handed over felt heavy with compromise. The rest of the money remained in its thick stack on the table, a silent monument to my indecision. The mountain of gifts was now crammed into my small apartment, making the space feel even more claustrophobic. The new bicycle was a constant, gleaming accusation in the corner. I told Marco we were storing it for a friend, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. The neighborhood had settled back into its usual rhythm, but the whispers followed me whenever I stepped outside. I could feel their eyes, the curious and fearful glances. I was no longer just Elena, the struggling single mum. I was the woman the black cars had visited. Then, on the fourth day, there was another knock on the door. It was different this time. 2 sharp, confident raps. My stomach plummeted. I crept to the peephole, my heart pounding a familiar, frantic beat. It was not one of the imposing men in suits from before. This man was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silvering hair at his temples and a kind, weary face. He wore a simple tweed jacket, not a suit. He looked less like a mob enforcer and more like a college professor or a lawyer. He was holding a briefcase, and he stood patiently, his expression calm. He seemed to know I was watching him. Summoning a courage I didn't feel, I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man offered a small, reassuring smile. "My name is Mr. Russo. I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a moment of your time? It concerns the recent delivery." The way he said delivery was deliberate, a clear acknowledgement of the surreal events of a few days prior. He wasn't here to threaten me. He was here to explain. Against my better judgment, I found myself stepping aside to let him in. He entered the apartment and his eyes took in the scene, the boxes stacked against the walls, the new microwave on the counter, the bicycle. He didn't comment. He just gave a slow nod, as if confirming something to himself. "Please, don't be alarmed," he said, turning to face me. "I'm here to help you manage this transition. There are arrangements that need to be made to ensure your comfort and security." Transition? Arrangements? The corporate-sounding language was jarring, a sterile veneer over something deeply personal and dangerous. What did he mean by transition? And whose security was he really here to ensure? Mr. Russo sat at my small kitchen table, placing his briefcase beside him, but not opening it. He folded his hands neatly on the table, his demeanor calm and professional. It was the calm of a man who was used to being in control, who navigated difficult situations with practiced ease. "Elena," he began, using my first name as if we were old acquaintances, "I understand that the events of the past few days must have been unsettling for you. The intention was not to frighten you, but to express profound gratitude. Sometimes our methods can be a bit overwhelming for those unaccustomed to them." He spoke with the careful precision of a diplomat, each word chosen to soothe and reassure. But I was not soothed. "Gratitude for what?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "For a bowl of soup? This is too much." He nodded slowly. "To you it was a bowl of soup. To us it was a gesture of respect and humanity shown to a man who holds a place of great honor in our family. In our world, such things are not measured in dollars and cents. They are measured in loyalty." He paused, letting the word hang in the air between us. "Let me be direct. Your immediate problems are taken care of. Your landlord, Mr. Henderson, has received a payment in full for your back rent, along with an advance for the next 12 months. He has been persuaded that it is in his best interest to ensure you are a comfortable and respected tenant from now on." The word "persuaded" sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about money, it was about influence. The kind of influence that made stubborn landlords compliant. "Furthermore," he continued, "an anonymous donation has been made to the local pediatric clinic. It will cover all of Marco's medical expenses, including his asthma treatments for the foreseeable future." My head was spinning. Eviction, medical bills, the two crushing weights that had defined my existence were being lifted just like that, but the strings attached to this generosity felt like they were wrapping around my neck. I can't accept this," I stammered. "Why are you doing all this?" He then opened his briefcase, but he didn't pull out a weapon or more money. He pulled out a folder. "We are doing this because honor demands it," he said simply. And we have one more thing to offer you. Not a gift, but an opportunity. A job. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a job offer to be the office manager and bookkeeper for a local bakery, a well-known, beloved place called La Stella. The salary listed was more than double what I was making now, with full benefits. It's a legitimate business, Elena. A good one, he said softly. The owner is a cousin. He needs someone trustworthy, someone with a good heart. It was an offer I couldn't possibly refuse, but it was also clear that refusing was not really an option. I was being woven into the fabric of their world, thread by thread. I stared at the job offer, the crisp black letters blurring before my eyes. A real job, a salary that meant I could stop choosing between rent and food. It was everything I had been dreaming of, handed to me on a silver platter. But the platter was held by a hand I couldn't see, attached to a body of immense, shadowy power. Who? I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. Who was he? The man in the diner? Mr. Russo leaned back in his chair, a flicker of something, sadness perhaps, or deep respect, in his eyes. The man you met was Leo Costello, he said quietly. The name meant nothing to me. It wasn't a name I'd ever heard on the news. He is the elder, the patriarch, not in title anymore, but in spirit. The heart of the family, he went on to explain. The Costello family had been a cornerstone of this neighborhood for nearly a century. The man who now ran the organization, the Don, as the papers might call him, was Leo's younger nephew, a man named Dominic. But Leo was the one who held their history. He was the one who remembered the old ways, the codes of honor and respect that were the foundation of their world. In recent years, after the passing of his wife, Leo had grown melancholic. He felt the world had lost its soul, that the old values of community and compassion had been replaced by greed and indifference. So he had taken to walking among the people, dressed as one of them, without his drivers, without his entourage. He was testing the heart of the city his family had long protected. He would go to diners, to parks, to bus stations. Mr. Russo explained, his voice low. He wanted to see if anyone still cared. Most of the time, he was met with scorn, or worse, with invisibility. People looked right through him. My mind flashed back to the diner, to the old man's lonely figure and the weight in his eyes. He wasn't just poor, he was testing a theory, and the world was failing his test. And then he met you, Russo continued, his gaze meeting mine. You who had next to nothing. You saw him, not as a burden, but as a fellow human being. You gave him your last few dollars. You didn't do it for a reward. You did it because it was the right thing to do. In that one small act, you proved to a very important man that the old ways were not dead, that there was still light in the world. My throat was tight. The $7, it wasn't about the money. It was a symbol, a proof of life for a dying code. Your kindness to him, Mr. Russo concluded, was a profound gift to our entire family. It restored a measure of his faith, and for that we are in your debt. A debt we will never be able to fully repay, but we will spend a very long time trying. I finally understood. This wasn't a transaction, it was a testament. My simple act of compassion had rippled through a world I never knew existed, and the echo was now rearranging my entire life. Acceptance felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. I took the job. The next Monday, I walked into La Stella Bakery, not as a customer carefully counting my change for a loaf of day-old bread, but as the new office manager. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of baking bread and almond biscotti. The owner, a barrel-chested man named Sal, who introduced himself as Mr. Russo's cousin, greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm, genuine smile. There was no interview, no talk of my resume. There was only a quiet understanding. I was family now, or at least under the family's protection. The work was real. I managed inventory, handled payroll, and balanced the books. I was good at it. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. I had a place to be, a role to fill. My life began to change in countless small ways. I paid the rent, not with the cash from the envelope, which I had locked away in a box, but with my first real paycheck. I took Marco to a proper doctor, not the emergency room, and we got his asthma under control. We had a refrigerator full of fresh food. He had a new bike, which he rode with wild abandon in the small park down the street. The constant, grinding fear that had been the soundtrack to my life began to fade, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. I saw the family now, not as the terrifying specters from that first morning, but as the fabric of the neighborhood itself. They were the men who owned the butcher shop, who ran the construction company that fixed the potholes in the street, who sponsored the local Little League team. They were a paradox. I knew intellectually that their influence was born from a history that likely included violence and things the law would not condone. But what I saw with my own eyes was different. I saw them quietly paying the funeral expenses for a widow. I saw them intimidating a local drug dealer until he moved his operation out of the neighborhood. They were the unofficial government of our small world, operating on a code of loyalty and protection that was, in its own way, more reliable than any city service. I never saw Mr. Russo again, or the young man who had knocked on my door. Their presence was a quiet, unseen shield. I was no longer just Elena. I was Elena from La Stella, and in our neighborhood, that meant something. It meant I was protected. I was one of theirs. Months melted into a year. The harsh lines of worry on my face began to soften. I gained a little weight. I laughed more. Marco was thriving in school, a happy, healthy 8-year-old, no longer burdened by the quiet anxieties of a parent who was always struggling. Our one-room apartment started to feel like a home, filled not just with new things, but with a sense of security I had never known. The fear had not vanished entirely. It had simply receded, becoming a low, background hum, a reminder of the strange pact I had made with this unseen world. I still had the box with the remaining $9,000 untouched. It felt like a sacred object, a relic from the day my life split into a before and an after. One crisp autumn afternoon, the bell above the bakery door chimed. I was in my small office just off the main shop, reconciling the day's receipts. Sal called out from the front, his voice warm and respectful. "Good afternoon, Uncle." A ripple of quiet went through the bakery. Customers instinctively made way. My curiosity piqued. I glanced up through the small window that looked out onto the shop floor. And there he was. Leo Costello, the old man from the diner. He looked different. The frayed coat was gone, replaced by a beautifully tailored cashmere overcoat. The weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a calm, quiet clarity. He looked healthy, strong. He carried himself not with the swagger of a boss, but with the profound, unshakable stillness of a man who knows exactly who he is. He didn't look in my direction. He walked to the counter and ordered a single espresso, exchanging a few quiet words in Italian with Sal. My heart was pounding. This was the man who had, without a word, completely altered the course of my life. He was the cause of it all, the black cars, the money, the job, my son's health, my peace of mind. He was a ghost from my past, now standing solid and real, just a few feet away. After finishing his espresso at the counter, he turned to leave. But as he passed the window to my office, he paused. He turned his head slightly and his eyes met mine. It was just for a second. There was no overt sign of recognition. But in that brief, silent gaze, I saw it all. Gratitude, respect, a shared secret. It was an acknowledgement that bound us together in that moment. Then he was gone, the bell chiming his exit. On the counter where he had stood, he had left a small, neatly wrapped gift. Sal picked it up and brought it to my office. "He left this for your boy," he said, with a small smile. It was a small, wooden toy car, beautifully carved and painted by hand. A simple, anonymous gift from a patriarch to the son of a woman who had shown him kindness. I held the small wooden car in my hand, its smooth, polished surface cool against my skin. It was such a simple thing, a toy. But it was also a message. It was a quiet confirmation of the unspoken promise that now defined my life. The gifts, the job, the protection, they were not a payment for a debt. They were the ongoing expression of a bond forged in a rainy diner over a $7 bowl of soup. I finally understood that in their world, loyalty wasn't a contract. It was a current, flowing silently beneath the surface of everyday life. My one small act of empathy hadn't bought me security. It had revealed that I was already part of a community I hadn't recognized, a web of interconnected lives held together by older, deeper rules. That evening I finally opened the box where I had kept the money. I took the stack of bills and walked to the neighborhood church, the one Mrs. Rossi attended every morning. The sanctuary was empty and quiet, smelling of old wood and beeswax. I slipped the envelope into the donation box, not with a feeling of fear or obligation, but with a sense of release. It wasn't my money to keep. It was a seed, and it had already grown into something far more valuable, a life for my son. I had been given a gift, and now I was passing it on. As I walked home, the streets of my neighborhood looked different. I saw the interconnected threads, the baker who gave a job, the old woman who offered wisdom, the unseen patrons who ensured the streets were safe for a boy to ride his bike. I had stumbled into the heart of a family, not one of blood, but one of mutual respect. I realized the old man, Leo Costello, hadn't just been testing the world that night. He had been searching for a reason to believe in it, and in a moment of shared humanity, I had given him one. In return, he and his family had given me something I thought I had lost forever: hope. My life was no longer defined by what I lacked, but by the quiet strength of the community that held me. I was no longer an island. I was home. The world was still cruel, and shadows still lurked in the corners. But I had learned that a single act of kindness could indeed be a light. And sometimes that light doesn't just push back the darkness, it calls an entire army of guardians out of the shadows to stand by your side. If you were moved by Elena's story, subscribe to our channel for more tales of unexpected kindness and hidden loyalty. And let us know in the comments, what is the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? We believe every small act of compassion has the power to change a life.